So a while back I purchased this M18 framing nailer to help with my fencing project after Storm Helene damaged a lot of the fence in my yard. And this framing nailer has been awesome. It has more power than I ever would have thought it did, and I've put around 3,000 nails through this gun so far, and I've been very impressed with it. I just got this 4x4 sitting here to demonstrate 3-inch nails firing way below flush with no problem, with the depth turned all the way up on the gun. Just sticking a 2x4 up here, no problem. And I did have a lot of fence to work on and still have some bad places here and there, but I became very interested in how this gun works, especially the type of mechanism it uses, because it does pack quite a punch. It almost feels like a powder actuated gun in your hand, and 3.5-inch nails are no problem with this gun. Since I still have a lot of work to do with mine, I definitely didn't want to take it apart. I did want to try something that might also make a good video. That's buying a broken one, and nothing else, seeing what's inside and having some parts. But I believe if I could get it working, I would love to have one set up for like 2-inch nails and one set up for 3-inch nails. So I bought this one off of eBay, and honestly I don't know if you can consider $130 for something that's broken to be a good deal, but I will say it's hard to find them any cheaper than that. And on a quick search for like eBay on parts for the 2744-20, you'll see that these parts still bring really good money used typically. Anything from the complete motor assembly with the sensors and all, gearbox assembly, from sprocket to housings, you name it really. They still bring a pretty good price because it's hard to find replacement parts for these. If you've ever looked for parts for these, you know what I'm talking about. This is just an example here, the motor electronic controls assembly. It's got the brushless motor controller, the sensors, and it's almost as much as I paid for the gun by itself. So we hope at least that's in good shape on ours. We see that the gearbox itself, like the little planetary gearbox assembly, can run from like $40 to $50 I've seen, and all these parts are used. But it just goes to show you that there is some value in these even if they're non-working, but probably not a chance I would have taken other than wanting to have more knowledge about how they work and if we can get one working here in a video. So here's the one that we have, and we already have a problem with like the magazine slide. Looks like we have a problem with the spring. But in the item description for this one, it said it would power on but would not fire. So I'm hoping the electronic parts are good. We're going to put a battery in here and just test. You have to hold the button to turn these on, and it goes into single fire mode or single sequential actuation. We can also put it on the contact or bump actuation, more like semi-auto. It does have a couple nails in it, and the slide is back far enough where it should allow the gun to try to fire, and it's like we're not even trying at all. It's definitely acting like it's a switch failure, but if it was that easy, that would be a good thing, but it could absolutely be more than that. These nails seem to be lodged in. If you notice here, our light does come on, so that lets me know that at least one of the switches are activating. Make sure we are discharged, even though the battery's out of it. We can also see that it's missing one of the screws here, so this definitely has been taken apart, at least to some degree. All this seems to work just fine here on the slide. Going to go ahead and get these nails out and just see if that helps at all. We still have one more wedged in. And with the battery out, we're going to try to push it back. And there we go. So that is totally clear. We just have one stuck in the magazine. And I've just simply taken this off. I just screwed it all the way off. It usually has like a little C-clip or E-clip on the very end right here, just holding that on there. And I've just taken this off to make sure this does slide correctly. And everything feels good with that spring and seems to be moving as expected. I'm going to go ahead and remove the screws here, and we'll take off this magazine. Yeah, we only had the one screw there, as you can see. No screw in this side at all. And we just have one shorter screw here. And this magazine should come off. And there we go. We definitely need to clean this up. The slide is gritty, but it's more than that. If we can see here, the spring itself has a kink in it right here and it's humped up, and if I let it go really strong, it will go past it, but it gets hung up. So we definitely need to work with that spring, and if we get the gun working, we'll look at that maybe in another separate video. Probably not a whole lot to it really. We're going to go ahead and take off what's left of this rafter hook bracket. We don't really need that anyway, and we'll switch out the hex for the T20 Torx security bit, and we'll take all these screws out. We'll fast forward through a lot of this part. Don't see anything behind this label. I'll go ahead and cut this label. Looks like it may have been cut before. It may have been opened up previously. We'll separate this case out. It's got one more screw on the back side of the housing for the cylinder. And I think that's all the screws. This thing has been used a lot, but I kind of wanted to see what kind of wear one has after it has been used for quite some time, and just seeing if we have any luck getting it going. And there we go. And it doesn't look too bad. It's definitely had a lot of use. And we see that our port for charging this cylinder with probably nitrogen from the factory is definitely hidden from us inside the handle. There's no way to access that without taking this thing apart. We do see on here that it says pressure 102 psi. The first thing I want to do is check this switch. I'm just going to take my fine needle probes and go into the silicone and get on these terminals and just push this switch plunger in. And yep, this switch looks like it's working perfectly. This is just going to be an input back to the control board, not a high current switch by any means, just simply a signal or an input to the board. We have several other cables here, which means we got several more sensors, and looks like a solenoid here on the back maybe. I'll try to get you up close look at this in just a minute. I'm just trying to look the way these wires are routed, and I do see something here. It looks like a magnet, maybe out of a bit holder or something like that, like a 1/4 inch or 5/16 hex driver. Had some other metal with it as well, but the more I look at it, it's a holder right here, so it must have a Hall sensor. Yep, this piece right here looks like it goes to a Hall sensor, so this is not a physical contact, this is a solid state sensor. I'll zoom in so you can see this, and maybe this shows up a little bit better. And I want to take time to apologize here for the graininess. This video was not showing grainy like this. It was my OBS recording. I had done an update, and for some reason OBS decides to change your bitrate settings when you do an update, and I don't understand why that can't be left alone. But unfortunately, a lot of this up close troubleshooting here, when I move it will get grainy, and hopefully the rest of the video will be corrected. But this magnet looks like it goes here and just slides in like so. I might need to put a drop of glue on this magnet, but being in steel like this, I would not think it would pop out easy. But either way, whether it was dropped hard or who knows, it did come loose. Very surprising. I don't know if I've ever seen that on a tool before, but I don't want to glue it yet because I threw this magnet in here without testing first. I know from working on scooters and things that the north and south polarity of that magnet does matter on some sensors, whether it picks up or doesn't pick up. So for now the magnet is in place, but I need to keep in the back of my mind that I may have to turn this over to function properly. But hopefully you can see here, even with the video grainy, that we just have a Hall sensor here mounted for our contact trigger. We also see all the grease and the plastic bits from the nail clips that gets in these guns. Those plastic pieces just get everywhere. It's not surprising that they're inside the gun whatsoever. But I really wish they would have put this charging port where it was accessible from the other side, or maybe from the top, even if you have to put some type of a cap or seal on it. But they obviously have chosen to put it in the handle instead, so you have to take it apart to service it, knowing that it needs to be nitrogen, and maybe that's the reason why. Not real sure. So back now after cleaning up this unit a lot, I do want to let the remaining bit of nitrogen out of this canister. It's probably already low, but I want to take the piston out and at least look at it and clean it up. And we do have some pressure here, but our anvil and piston is all the way back, so we should be way above 102 psi. We should be compressed. I'm assuming 102 psi is probably with it down, and then it compresses way more than that when it retracts the piston. So it's got a lot more pressure in the cylinder when it does release or fire. So I'm just going to unscrew this canister or cylinder. Just going to keep pushing on the Schrader valve that's in here just to release the gas. And we do see our rubber bumper. We can definitely feel it hit that bumper really hard when it fires. The cylinder looks very, very good. Of course, we're going to have a vacuum here and we're going to have to release that, but we want to pull on it and just make sure it does have a vacuum. That's a good sign. We're getting a good seal. It feels really, really good. Go ahead and relieve some more of the vacuum. Definitely a good seal. And if this would have just pulled right out, we would have knew that we probably had a seal issue. And it doesn't look real dirty. It's going to look gray because of the aluminum for sure. And it's usually like a synthetic grease of some sort. And it just gets gray mixed in with the aluminum. But back now, after having this cleaned up, it doesn't look bad at all. We can see it's hardened. The seal's cleaned up well, and even where the anvil hits the nail, because nails are soft, it's held up very well. We do see how this sprocket retracts this piston, and we also see here that we have a magnet built in to this. It looks like for position, so we have another Hall switch on the other side. But I'm wondering about this sprocket here that almost looks like a chain link. I would imagine that's supposed to be completely round, but not sure about that. But that's probably damage. And just simply looking at one for sale on eBay does verify that it has one like that as well. So I'm still not sure because this one's used, but you can tell it's got the same type of spline instead of smooth on this barrel here. So maybe that's okay. The only other thing I'd be concerned about is if this is a keyway, this seems like a lot of play on the shaft to the sprocket. I know it's hard to tell just with video, but this thing's got some play back and forth. And with a key, that will mean wear. But if we look on eBay at that same listing or one like it, we see that this design is to be of the type that it's got the flats and it's machined out to have just a little bit of movement. So this seems to be somewhat normal. It could have some wear, but it does seem to be acting similar as designed. But now with everything cleaned up, we see our feedback from our Hall sensor here. We also see we have a solenoid here. Let me flip this over. This is going to be our release. This must be a very strong little plunger or solenoid because you would think that would be under a lot of pressure. But yet they could be using this brushless motor to also back it off, release it, and drop it, and then retract it back. But hopefully you can see here from this angle, that should be like the home or sense position here. So somewhere right in there. So let's put our rubber bumper on here and let's slide this back in. And by the way, this is keyed. It only can go one way. Has a slot here, as you can see. I have to hold this plunger up. And that's what it looks like in the fired position. And then typically the motor would evidently retract this and put extreme pressure in the cylinder. So if we turn this something like this, and evidently come to there where it senses, and then it's ready to fire. As soon as that solenoid releases, if I can do it with one hand here, I can push it and it fires like so. So all in all, it's in pretty good condition. This is our brushless motor assembly with the gearbox, and it does have the Hall feedback to the controller. And I'm just realizing here that this is keyed, so this goes this direction, which makes sense when you think about the way the wiring for the controller lays. But this is all the way in and turned 180 degrees it will not go. So that is keyed to only go one way. If you ever struggling to get one to go in flush, you'll see that that is designed to be one way only. I'm going to go ahead and put some synthetic grease on this piston before we reassemble. I'm just going to use some of this super lube with some Teflon in it. Of course it needs to be synthetic because O-rings will swell and petroleum based lubricants put some on the cylinder itself as well as the piston. Put a little bit up here for good measure. It'll be there over time. And I'm going to put some on this sprocket as well, but not until I'm getting ready to reassemble, so it won't sling it all over my bench here. So we're going to screw this back on, and I'm probably going to go, let's see, it should go this way from the factory, but I'm probably going to go around a little bit further and see if I can make it stick out of the front while I'm troubleshooting and working on it. And of course, these wires here, they have to stay out of this big groove. You don't want to put it there because that's where the cylinder itself lines up in the housing. So these wires can go like so in the groove right behind the big thick groove. This rubber gasket goes in that thick groove, and you don't want your wires there. So this connector goes in its holding place there. Just make sure these wires here are not getting pinched, especially after rotating this cylinder almost 180 degrees from where it should be. We're going to get our LED and our controller back in place here, so we can get our wires straightened out, tucked away like so. These wires here, as long as they're not being pinched, they're fine. At this point in time, we don't have our cylinder refill port in the way of the trigger area here, so we're a little more lenient on where our wiring can go until we reassemble correctly. We're just going to put our little micro switch back in place, and we do have a little spot for an O-ring here. I'll put the little white O-ring back on there when I get done so I won't lose it. I just want to test and see if we can get any movement out of the gun. We have no cylinder pressure at this time, but does my switches at least work properly now? So insert the battery and let's cut the unit back on. Single shot mode is fine, and we see that this switch works. The light comes on, and that's disappointing. Cut it off and back on. Just go to a different mode to see if it acts any differently, and see the light doesn't come on until I press the actual trigger. So I still think we're having issues with this Hall sensor here in the front. So I got the battery back out now, and I just want to take time to try to turn this magnet over. And man, I played heck getting this magnet back out. I tried several different strong magnets that I have. I have an old magnet out of a hard drive that I've had for years that is really, really strong, and nothing would get that little strong magnet back out of there. But I did have a group of some really strong magnets that I put on here, and once I turned the polarity the right way to attract it, it actually did pull it back out. So now what I need to do is just flip this over, and let's put it in the other way for testing. So flip it over and make sure it don't flip back on me. And there we go. I did take the spring and all off because I was having trouble getting it out, and I was going to try to tap it from the back side, but it still would not come out. So why it popped out originally, it must have took one really hard fall, my best guess. So if this works, I could definitely try to take it out and put a drop of glue in it, but after flipping it over, let's just take time to test it out first. I'm going to put this little plastic cover. It just snaps on, and then the spring. And there we go. That looks good. If this doesn't work, we might have a bad Hall sensor, but hopefully that's all it is. Let's go ahead and put this little contact bracket back on. I'm going to try with this refill port out like so, even though we know it's supposed to be here. And the shape of this is going to be a little bit hard to get the cover back on properly, but I really don't want to drill a hole in the very center of the case. I would rather just temporarily bring it out into an opening, but it's just not fitting perfectly. I'm going to put a Rapid strap on here to make sure the gearbox does stay in the housing while testing with the housing still apart. Let's go ahead and install our battery, and realize I don't have the sprocket lubed for testing. As mentioned, I don't want it to sling all over the place. We'll just put it on single shot mode, and we see now when we push this contact bracket up that our light comes on, and that wasn't happening before, so that's promising, and we do get movement. It's not acting properly, but I believe we have to have some charge in this cylinder. But at least we know We got this Hall sensor working, and now we just have to work out a way to get air in the cylinder in some type of way in this port here. I have taken the time to make sure this piston is all the way extended or down. I would think when you charge this to say 102 psi as shown, it should be with the cylinder all the way extended, and then the work done by the motor is to compress that greater. This is a lot of play in this sprocket. Just don't know for sure if that's okay or not, but looking at those photos, I believe it is somewhat normal. So I'm going to see if I can put some air in this. So I have put a little over 100 psi in this cylinder. We know that we have the Hall sensor working, so let's see what it does now. I just have this trigger back in place here without the spring for now, and if we pull this down, our light comes on and it actually does fire. It doesn't sound very strong though. So something's going on with the way that it retracts back. It's like it's not in position. Just going to cut it off and back on, and let's just change the mode, see if it's any different. So now we could just hold one down and should be able to keep firing. And but no matter how we do it, it's just not resetting correctly. So if I put a mark on here, this looks like the proper spot where it will fire if it's stopped here. But if you see it fires and it will not go back to that spot until you pull the trigger again, and then there it goes to the spot. Maybe we can call that home position. But after firing, it does not go back there on its own, but then it does the second attempt. And the good thing is it is trying to fire, so it's doing something. I believe that's going to be related to the pressure we have in the cylinder. Even though I'm pretty sure I put about 100 psi or greater air in, I know I did have some losses across the spring of that Schrader valve, so I guess that could be 5 to 10 psi loss to get through that Schrader. Really don't know the design of that, but I know you have to take that into account with pneumatics. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble, and I'll work on a way to get more air pressure in this cylinder and see if we can fix this unit. Go ahead and put the spring back for the trigger. I'm going to remove the Rapid Velcro strap, add some lube to the sprocket, add a little bit of lube here where the striker comes down. We'll just go ahead and put our case back together if we can do it with this service port sticking out. It's going to make it tough. It's obviously not made to do that. We'll see if it'll pull down tight enough to work with and troubleshoot. Put the one back on the other side, and we are back together. It was tight. This cover does not like that in that spot, but instead of modifying the cover, I just thought I would force it. I definitely could have taken a little Dremel tool or a Unibit and opened this spot up a little bit, but it actually did fit. You can just tell it's got a little bit of pressure on it, and I just want to be able to access this port instead of it being in the handle, because I know I got to play around with the pressure a little bit. Now all I have to do is just put this magazine back on, and you can see here where this coil spring is crimped. That is causing a problem, but it doesn't give trouble until it gets down almost all the way empty, but that is definitely a problem we'll work on later. We're just going to install it back on the gun for now. And I just realized I put the small screws in here, and it was one long screw. Those two short screws actually went for that bracket for the rafter hook. So let's put this long one back, and I'll actually find some more screws. Right now I have one short one in, since I don't need that rafter hook, but it's not quite long enough. I'll look for a longer one for that one after we get it working. Back now, I did use a high pressure air rifle pump to pump this up, and this is what type of pump I use. They're relatively cheap, but they will put out a lot of pressure. You'd have to be careful not to go too high, obviously, but it is hard to put pressure in these, so it will be very difficult to over pressurize it, but it could be done. I started off just using my air compressor in this rubber tip on this blow nozzle just to help me try to get a seal, and that's what helped me get that first test going until I got a hold of this air rifle pump. And after finding out what thread this is, and I'll show later how I found out the thread size and pitch, but these are very high pressure but very low volume, so you have to make sure you take a fitting like this that is the correct thread after you remove the little moisture filter. But if you can keep the moisture filter on there, it will be better, because that's why you want to use nitrogen. It's definitely better to use nitrogen. I've worked with that kind of stuff in the past with bladders and anything rubber or cylinder related. Nitrogen is more contamination free and moisture free, and it'll be a lot less issue and wear in your cylinder for sure with nitrogen. You hear many people say that air is already 78% nitrogen, so just put air in it. So I did that and it works. I'm just not going to be the one to say, hey, air is okay. I know why they use nitrogen, and that's probably why they make this where it's hard to service, is they don't want people without nitrogen systems trying to fix it this way. And if I can get a hold to a nitrogen and regulator system, I will definitely recharge this with nitrogen. But for testing, this 10mm by 1 thread does fit in this port. And some of my first testing with just 100 psi from the air compressor, this is all I was getting. It was very spongy. I was having to pull the trigger twice to make it fully retract, and then after putting around 200 psi or so, it's hard to tell with that gauge that comes with the high pressure pump, but I finally got to seal. And if you don't have it sealing, you will not be able to build pressure. I finally got to seal, and I saw the needle start moving, and I kept pumping, and I got it up to like 200 psi, probably 250. And that's with the anvil all the way down extended like it's fired. And then I fired it a couple times and it struggled to retract it. So then I just bled the air off. Don't truly have a gauge to go by, but I'm going to guess about 175 to 200 psi. It's probably what I ended up with in this gun. I don't have a good way to hook a high pressure gauge up to this. And like I said, the one that came with the air pump, it's made to go away to like 5,000 psi. But after charging this up, and it's got a powerful pop to it. Man, I like that. Awesome. So that was 2-inch nails. Let's throw some 3-inch nails in there. It's not going to be just barely getting 2-inch nails in. Let's check out these 3-inch nails in the 4x4. Bam. How about that? Didn't send them all the way through it, but they definitely buried pretty deep. I had the depth turned all the way up where it goes in further as well. Just going to put this cap back on to make sure nothing gets in there and pushes that Schrader valve. I'm torn between leaving it like this or putting it back right. I don't like it sticking out. I really wish Milwaukee would have done a little better, making a little bit shorter port and having it where it would be covered, but still more easily accessible than it was from the factory. You can see here my Milwaukee's turned because that port was turned back towards my wrist. But yeah, I think at least troubleshooting wise, that definitely got it working. So awesome. Just in case this helps somebody else out, I want to share that I used a thread checker to check the threads on this charging port, and it is showing like it's M10 by 1.0, which is kind of unusual, but it's definitely a thread that we have worked with in the industry before, and I have special order taps and things for this thread size in the industry. It's not in your typical thread kits, but you can see that fits really, really well, and the cap turns in really, really well. So I'm pretty confident it's the M10 by 1.0, which looks really, really similar sometimes to 1/8 pipe thread or 1/8 NPT, but this is a straight thread, and NPT of course is tapered. I'm just going to go ahead and put this cap back on, and I did also get some longer screws to go back into the magazine. And by the way, this thread is M5 by 0.8 thread pitch, if you find that helpful. I'm also going to share a picture of the MOSFETs here in case anyone finds that interesting. It has 6 of these, 3 on each side of the controller. I'm also going to share the breakdown here for the magazine. As you can see, the coil spring itself is 99N. Looks like 108 is the whole kit, which is part number 14-46-0143. I believe that's the part number for the whole spring roller kit, and maybe we'll replace that in a future video. Well, I hope you found this video helpful today. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm going to have some links down in the video description of some of the tools and items that I found very helpful in this repair and just handy to have around my workbench. Any of those links you click on are affiliate links, and they help support the channel, and I greatly appreciate it. So thanks so much for watching, and God bless.